1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Maximum brightness. The Vortex Viper seen here is in 6 MOA form with a pick rail mount. These do come with the pick rail mounts, so if you do choose to run this on a small carbine, you easily can. Despite the fact that these are getting up there in age, these are still available brand new for around $200. So, is this thing still worth its price point? I currently have this set up for around pistol length. It's about 18 inches from camera lens to the lens on the optic. So if you're wondering what this is going to look like with your arms mostly fully extended, this is roughly what it's going to look like. Pew pew! However, you will see what it's going to look like roughly at carbine length. Pew pew! The 6 MOA dot on this does seem a little bit small, but I do prefer a larger dot when it comes to pistols. For carbines, I prefer 3 MOA. Pew pew! Pew pew pew! Let's take a look at what comes in the box real quick. The pick rail mount is quite nice. It comes with a proprietary footprint which has 4 pins in either corners, springs on the claw, and helicoil inserts. This way you don't have to worry about stripping it. The rubber cover is not only nice but very form-fitting, so once it's on, it stays on. One really unique feature to this red dot sight is it has 2 set screw locking points for your windage and your elevation adjustments, so you shouldn't have to worry about losing your zero. Focusing our attention on the 6 MOA dot. Every once in a while it does look smaller than 6 MOA until you put it next to something that's 2 or 3 MOA, then it does seem bigger, but it doesn't seem as big as most other 6 MOA dots. As far as the overall brightness that you can achieve on this thing, it does get quite bright. As far as the buttons on it, the controls are on the left hand side, with the up being to the front and the down being to the back. Press and hold the up button to turn it on, press and hold the down button to turn it off. There are no auto brightness settings on this, and there is no auto shutoff, so it's pretty dumbed down. I do wish the buttons were on opposite sides, because for me it's easier to remember which one is which and to make a quick adjustment if you have to. If you're trying to change the brightness on this or turn it on in a hurry, you might be pressing the wrong button by mistake, so something to take note of. To my eye, even with an astigmatism, the dot stays nice and round, and it does get quite bright. The steps between its minimum to maximum brightness are pretty nice, so this way you have basically whatever brightness that you will need for any given time. For anyone wondering what the battery setup looks like, this is it. This is a bottom mount battery, so if you do have to replace it, you do have to unmount it. However, with the 4 pins that this thing mounts to on the pick rail mount, I'm not too worried about this thing losing zero. This does take a standard CR2032 battery and does have a nice seal around the board, so you shouldn't have to worry about water egress. The nice thing about at least the bottom mount battery is the full-size battery. I don't know what the battery life is on this, but it's going to probably be more than what you might find on something like the Venom because that takes a much smaller battery. Of course, if you are worried about the emitter coming from the front, you can and will see it. However, you have to be basically right on top of it to notice it. So, not really the end of the world. As far as the overall weight with the mount, it's about 2 ounces. Without the mount, it's about 1 ounce. So, pretty lightweight. It was plain to see that at least on the tabletop this thing has a decent amount of tint, but what about the distortion? Well, that is definitely something that is a giant pet peeve of mine, and there's more to this than I would personally like to see or have seen in some other options. However, for many people out there, they say it's a non-issue or quote-unquote that's how they are designed, but I think a lot of those people have RMRs and they're just trying to justify the massive amount of blue tint and distortion that is found with an RMR. Talk about shots fired. Panning across the berm, you will see that the top part of the image has much more distortion than the bottom part. This is at about carbine distance, so what you'd expect to see on like a PCC or any other rifle with the proper riser. I'd actually prefer if the distortion was all over the place as opposed to just the top half, because the image moves at 2 different paces, and it gives that sort of fisheye effect which I'm not too fond of. Cropping the image to take a better look at this, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Look at the grass in the bottom. It does have tint, but it doesn't really shift at all. Then look at the black part above the berm. You see that it really just pulls on the corners, and it creates that fisheye effect. It's not something that I'm the biggest fan of, like I've mentioned numerous times and will continue to do so. The flatter an image, no matter what the optic platform, the better the image and the more useful the image will ever be. One area where this optic at least performs quite well is with the reticle staying on target despite the fact that you're not perfectly behind it. I've seen a lot of red dots, whether it being pistol mounted red dots or carbine mounted red dots that don't do this all so well, especially when they have a lot of bubbling to the lens. Sometimes the reticle follows that when you get too far to the side and it drops down or lifts up. With this, the reticle is nice and stable on target where it belongs. And from there, let's put this side by side with its first main competitor, and that is going to be the $150 Primary Arms 24mm Classic. It is basically pound for pound the exact same as the Viper. The windows look almost identical, but there's no tint and really no distortion, or at least there's less than what the Viper has to offer. However, the 24mm Classic is basically a 3MOA dot only, so that is a strike against it, especially if you're going to be mounting it on a pistol. However, it does come with a pick rail mount, and it is in a more standard footprint with the 507C, so you can use it across different platforms quite easier than I would imagine with the Viper, but I could be talking about my ass on that one. These both weigh the same, they both look the same with the exception of the tint and the reticle size, and they cost roughly the same. However, the Primary Arms will shut off after 12 hours of inactivity, and it's rated at around 40,000 consistent hours of battery life on the medium setting, never shutting it off. Whether that's true or not, I haven't fully tested it, but it is a nice little pistol red dot and something that you should consider if you're looking at the Viper. Next up is going to be the MidTen RDS. I actually quite liked this thing when I first got it in hand, and they were around $200 or so when they were available. As of right now, they're showing that they're not available. I don't know if it's a temporary thing or not. They are made in China. In fact, basically all of these are made in China, but this does have a side-loading battery port, which is nice. You never have to unmount it to replace the battery. It comes with more or less the exact same sort of setup as the Viper, roughly the same size window, about the same weight. It's actually a little bit heavier, about 10% heavier, but the emitter does have a much worse refresh rate. So if you're really prone to seizures, or you don't like moving with your firearms, I wouldn't really recommend it. I'm just throwing it in here because guess what it is? It's another alternative. Just like this thing's smaller brother, the Vortex Venom. This one is in 3MOA, does come with, of course, a pick rail mount, obviously, but it does have the same footprint as the Viper, which is nice because you could swap them back and forth, but the battery life on this thing sucks. In fact, Vortex themselves say on their website it's only rated for about 150 hours on high, which is not that much. But don't worry, it's got a top-loaded battery compartment, so you don't have to worry about unmounting it to replace the battery. I'd much rather have a larger standard battery that requires the entire optic to be removed, as opposed to something that's only going to last a couple of days at best when you're rocking this thing really bright. Yeah, if it's a real concern of yours, overall battery life, yes, you can go with something like a Holosun, but you're going to be spending a lot more than what these things cost. The Viper does cost around $200, the Venom around $240, so it is a little bit more expensive, but the window is a little bit larger. The glass has a little bit less tint and a little bit less distortion to my eye, but it could just be on the day. It also comes in two reticle options, a 3MOA and a 6MOA dot. It also does have auto brightness, and it will shut off after 14 hours of inactivity, but still, it doesn't have great battery life. I asked at the beginning of this video, is this Viper still a contender? Is it still worth its $200? And is it still viable in a market where there are a lot of other options nowadays? Well, it does have some interesting points for it, most notably the screws in the back to lock your windage and elevation. No other real optic has that. Do you really need them? I'm not too sure. I think it's just another means for water to enter into the system and damage it. I've actually lost one. It wasn't 100% tight, and when I was shooting with it, it literally backed out and disappeared into the great yonder. So I have to contact Vortex to get a new one. I do harp on the pet peeves of mine, such as the tint and the distortion, but it's still perfectly serviceable, this thing. And for the price of $200, it's honestly still pretty reasonable. Would I go with it overall? Probably not. I think I'd probably stick with the Primary Arms 24 Classic in this price point. Would I ever consider them to be duty grade? Duty grade? What is duty grade anymore? You see Holosuns being used by militaries, and it's like, those were cheap Chinese optics a couple of years ago, and now they're taking place in some EOTechs and aim points. Are they as effective and as useful? Probably not, but people are still using them. And I guess duty grade is whatever you can consider affordable and within your realm of duty usage. For me, on a range toy, yeah, these would be perfectly fine. On my CCW, it'd probably be fine as long as I had them working in conjunction with some iron sights, because you always want to have a backup. But ultimately, is this thing worth a $200 price point? I still think it's holding its own. But again, I'd probably opt for the PA Classic. It's got cleaner, nicer glass. It's a little bit cheaper. It's about the same weight. It comes with all the same great stuff, but just at less money. And in my eye, in my opinion, it just works a little bit better as a result. And with that, thank you all very much for watching. And as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.